Good evening, everybody, and welcome. This is Liz Vallee. I am the candidate for the People's Party of Canada. And I'm having one of those online moments that you see all the time. That's amazing. That is my husband. That is my husband, Ian. I don't think he's happy that he just got caught on camera. So again, I am the candidate for the People's Party of Canada for Chatham-Kent-Leamington. Some nice comic relief there. You are watching the People's Forum. So the People's Forum is a place for the people. This is a place for your voice to be heard. This is all about whoever it is that I have online. This gives people a platform to express all sorts of ideas in all sorts of situations. So tonight we are going to be talking about the housing crisis that we are experiencing here in Canada. And we are going to be speaking with Cody McLean. Welcome, Cody.
Hey, Liz, how are you?
Great. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Good. So to start off, how about you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're going to be speaking about tonight.
Sure. Yeah, so as you mentioned, my name is Cody McLean. I'm actually a mortgage specialist here in Chatham-Kent. I cover from London all the way down to Windsor, pretty much every small little hamlet or town in between. I've been in the financial service industry for, since I was 18, actually, when I was started off as like a young teller, like in university and everything. But out of pure intrigue and found passion, I became really educated and driven to understand the inner workings of the retail banks, investments. I spent probably about 4 years in the advice side of the industry when it came to investments. I'm only one accreditation away from having my financial planning license. But I was a financial advisor before this, so a lot of my bulk experience was maybe complex lending, like agribusiness, small business, and even personal day-to-day banking. But I stepped away as of January to be a mortgage specialist, so specializing in just mortgages, residential, complex, multi-unit, that sort of thing, but also first-time home buyers and investors. A lot of even foreign investors and outside of Canada. So that's why you have me on the show about housing.
Right. That's quite interesting. Awesome. So my first question to you is, and we're going to get right into the meat of things here. Is there a large correlation between the national deficit and housing prices right now?
Yeah, it's a big part. I guess even Pierre and the Conservative Party mentioned this earlier today, inflation and the GDP. So when the government prints money to spend more money that we don't have earned through taxpayers, we have an inflation of the dollar that happens just naturally. Now, there is a correlation. There's a few different factors and gears that come into the housing issue. But on the whole, printing and spending more money than what you're growing and gaining in through taxpayers and other forms is definitely going to cause inflation. And even down to the staples of our consumer products that you see, from gas, grocery. I think gas year over year now is up to 30% inflation. You're seeing a huge hyperinflation happening because of spending at the federal level.
Okay, so to be clear, with all of the spending and the money that's been printed, just print from the Trudeau government, you're saying it does have a direct effect on housing prices, even locally here in Chatham-Kent?
It does, yes. Yeah, it even comes down to just basic cost of living. Well, if things are rising in even metropolitan centers like Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary is an exception. A few other major centers. If people can't afford to live there anymore, then they tend to move out. And a big drive for, say, Chatham-Kent area I think that the stat was, it was over 50%. I know that it was over 50% of buyers in Chatham were from out of town. And that was just I think it was last month or June, July time.
Okay, so they're noticing that because of the outrageous costs in, like you said, the bigger cities, Toronto and surrounding area, that they're left with no choice but to come and buy up homes here in Chatham-Kent, and probably, I would assume, as far as Leamington, or you have Windsor people coming into Leamington, that type of thing.
And even you can see them moving up north as well. Like that, people from Toronto are moving to Aurelia. Like there's a few different factors, but printing and spending of money to cause inflation across the board is a major issue that's contributing to the housing problem. Especially when you're printing and spending that much money, you would think that there would be some sort of housing solution from that money spent over 6 years of being in power, but there hasn't been. It's been getting worse.
Okay, so and it's something I've been saying, but I'm not a mortgage specialist. I'm not a realtor, so I don't know if people understand it quite when I'm trying to say it. I'm trying to say, it's all this printing, all this spending. And what did Pierre Poilievre call it? It was like a inflation tax or something like that, where that's what he refers to it as, right? And so now, what
your dollar is worth less today than it is tomorrow and the day after. Like your dollars are worth less every single time. It just perpetuates.
From the people that I've been talking to locally in this general area, we're seeing like double. People are getting double for their house when they put it on the market and they sell it. They're getting double and maybe sometimes above that. I hear people are getting outbid by $100,000 or something like that. So is that still a direct?
That becomes, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So there's a demand issue. So when you talk about the needless spending, it's partnered up with a huge part of immigration, and that's just internal immigration as well. So people from metropolitan areas, Toronto, larger city centers, moving out of their centers. Even this was a trend before even COVID. So people are saying like, oh, well, people can work from home. That was always an issue if people started moving away from the centers. So the demand increases in smaller municipalities. I think the stat that I read with RBC was that like places like Tillsonburg, I don't know if anyone knows where Tillsonburg is even listed on like the RBC Economics website as like one of the fastest growing and like largest little tiny centers of people immigrating to. So you're having a huge issue with people causing demand from having to move. So it's not just the spending aspect of it, it's just the limited supply. So when you say you have neighbors or friends or family members who are getting like $100,000 over asking price and such, now houses are priced at that point to hopefully they can drive that $100,000 over asking price demand, but the demand is there because the inventory is low. And then the inventory being low after having so much money and capital spent, more than any of his other predecessors before him, Trudeau's over a 6-year term, is uncalled for if there's a housing issue. And if he continues to increase immigration to 400,000 annually of new immigrants coming to Canada, and you don't know where they're going to be housed or put, and then you're setting them up for not a successful experience to be a new Canadian citizen.
Okay.
They'll never experience that dream of owning a home, and it's making it even harder for millennials as well to be able to afford a home.
That's a great point, because I was going to ask you, you're talking about internal immigration, but actually bringing those massive amounts of people in. So right now, is there, even though we have people from the bigger cities moving here, immigrating here just internally, do we still have a huge demand in Toronto for buying houses? Are they going through what we're going through?
They are. In fact, actually, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with Sagen. Um, everybody knows CMHC, like the insurer body. But Sagen is actually now the largest one in Canada, surpassed them by growth. But they used to be known as Genworth. They were a secondary insurer company for mortgages. Now they have a study that says this is specifically towards their new to Canadian citizens, which historically new to Canadian citizens, they pay their dues really well. Actually, they don't tend to default or on their mortgages or anything. So they tracked this stat, and it's over 70%. I don't have it in front of me, but I read it recently. It's either 74 or 76. I'm going to say 70% of new to Canadian citizens buy a home, and this is counting permanent residents or even on visas or international. They buy a home within 3 to 4 years of coming to this country, which causes higher and higher demand. So if 70% of new people immigrating here are also buying houses, and we have 400,000 of them every single year is what he wants to hit the target of, we're not putting Canadians first. Like, we have to, and it's great that they have the means to come here and do that and experience that dream, but it's affecting the generation with the housing shortage.
Right. And so I also worry, I mean, yes, I agree that it's not putting Canadians first, which is, I think, a huge hot topic right now that I hear from a lot of people, especially going through a pandemic. You know, there's a lot of Canadians that are worried about, you know, just taking care of Canada first. Let's get that under control. And then, you know, let's worry about everybody else. And not only that, but if you think about it from somebody who's coming into Canada's point of view, if we have nowhere to put them, then exactly. Are we really doing anybody any favors? We're not putting Canadians first, and that means all Canadians, whether they were here yesterday or whether they were here all their lives. We're not putting them first, and then we're also not bringing people in properly, and we're not treating them properly either, because we have nowhere for them to go. So so that's been a big question of mine over the last little bit too. It was something that I definitely have had on my mind. You know, there's ways that you have to do things, and part of bringing people into the country is bringing them in legally and properly and all of those things, but also we have to have jobs for them and places for them to live.
We have to set them up for success.
Yeah, or we're not doing anybody any favors on any side. Okay, so I've been going through the platforms a little bit, and we've been hearing a lot in the media about the Liberal platform for housing specifically, and there's a couple of things. One of the things I read was they're going to have a first home owner savings program where they can save up to $40,000 towards their first home. And another one is they're putting together a $1 billion rent to own program, and they're going to reduce home insurance. The other one too is the new home buyers bill of rights, and that is supposed to get rid of the blind bidding. So are there some of those things that you could elaborate on and kind of explain? And
sure. So I guess we'll talk about the first couple of ones about the tax-free allocations. Like, people hear the word tax-free and stuff, and they're like, oh, this must be really great and everything. But let me get this straight. Like, it's still your own earned money. Like, you've worked, you've saved it. What that amount is that they're talking about doubling is, they think about creating a savings account specifically for it, but it's just another product, if you may. But in this case, people who have RSPs or, say, tax-free savings accounts, they could use those for that short-term savings or long-term savings for a home. If it is, it's in a tax-free savings account. It is already tax-free earnings if you're having it invested. But it's still taxed at when you get paid by your employer to then put it into something to save. It's nothing specific, like it's not free money. Even with your RSP, when you withdraw it or defer that withdrawal for your first-time home buyer withdrawal, you do have to pay it back. Like it's not something that they just give you for free. It's like within 15 years you have to pay it back. And right now it's 35. Like don't quote me on the 35 specific, but when I was a financial advisor, it was 25, and now I think it's 35,000. So they want to increase it to 40,000. Great, that's fine. What 25-year-old or even 30-year-old possibly at this time in year as a millennial first-time homebuyer has $40,000 in the RSPs, if anything, if they don't already own a house? Like it doesn't make sense. And I guess the other one, what was the other one you mentioned? The rent-to-own situation there. So
Yeah.
like that. Okay, so rent-to-own. This is kind of getting into a sticky situation because they also want to cap how much rent like landlords would charge for the rent as a long-term agreement, which I don't see many landlords jumping on, or at least housing organizations. Maybe if it's a nonprofit, pushed with some extra money or funding or something like that to be able to buy a condo or buy a building to do this for it. I don't see many landlords doing this. And if they are, it's really getting rid of the privatization of a business. Like this is if you buy a house or you buy a few units or you eventually buy a multi-unit, you have the fairness to charge what you want on that for rent, based upon an assumed market value in the current market. So in this rent-to-own program, they have to sign an agreement. The landlord has to sign an agreement that they would charge less than the market average, and then agree for a payout after the end of the lease. But this also gets rid of some liberties of the private organization or the landlord, and that of the potential first-time home buyer. Because what happens if you decide you've now been contractually obliged to sign a lease? That also means that you're going to be buying at the end of the lease. What happens if you have any family members that get sick, or you have to leave the country, or a job opportunity arises, or anything that makes you less mobile? You're now in something that you're signing a contract on. I just think that it's kind of a little bit too much overstepping from a federal level. It should be still privatized and like under individual landlords or companies' discretion. And rent to own really does, like, I think RBC, I'm going to see if I can grab the RBC economics statistic it just came out today, actually. So they had a question in context of current housing market and policymakers. And RBC Economics says they should steer clear of taxation of transactions, such as land transfer tax, which we'll talk about in a second, and also resist providing more help for financial first-time home buyers without corresponding measures to boost supply, because it may have harmful effects long-term, even though it may seem helpful at first. But there may be problematic prices, like say if you're putting them in negative equity in the future, or in a place where they might not be able to afford, or any sort of situations. It may be problematic long-term for the housing market. So on terms of land transfer tax, I think I actually have just heard this yesterday from a few of my realtors I work with, and their clients are worried and panic selling now about their houses in Windsor and London. They're panicked because if Trudeau does get reelected, they want to potentially tax the capital gains on your existing equity earnings of your primary residence, not just rental properties and secondary residence. So that's huge, because imagine you buy your house, like say 10 years ago or whatever, and it was like maybe 200,000, maybe even 150, or like, Chatham market was not very high for a long time. And now whatever gain, now you say it's worth 500,000. Like that difference is going to be taxed if you go to sell as a capital gain. So it's coercive, and it keeps people from, like, it stops the mobility of like, even in our charter, like you should have the right to travel and live and change your place of occupation within any part of Canada. Like you're allowed, that's part of the charter, right? Go
So I
ahead.
have
Sorry.
I just have a question on that. So let's say my house sells for, because I would probably get at least double for this house now. So let's say I do. Let's say I have a gain of, on top of what I had bought it for, let's say $300,000. Okay, so I have that, and you're saying I'm going to pay a capital gains tax on that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
that's the way it's being presented from the Liberal Party. Yeah.
right.
Is that they're wanting to stop people from selling their house, and there's also going to be an additional tax for what's called a flipping tax if you sell your house after you've only owned it for less than a year. So if you're saying you're buying it for renovations and to flip and sell, they're going to tax you on top of that, a specialized tax, because you're trying to be entrepreneurial, or you want to start a house flipping business, or even a renovation business or something like that's.
A few years ago, like the house flipping business was booming.
It was all over like the TV. Like there's like how many stations of like couples getting together and like quitting their job and flipping houses for a living. Like that's
it was cool.
All over the place.
I thought it was pretty cool, a pretty cool business idea. Now let's say, so I'm in this situation where my house is so much worth so much more. I sell it and I have that capital gains. This isn't going to last, hopefully, right? Mm-hmm. Housing prices go back down. Then what happens?
Like, yeah, there's nothing back in your way. There's nothing in your favor at that point. You're not going to get. It's not a tax credit back to you. Like once you pay your capital gains tax, it's your income.
So I sell my home, but I buy another home that I wanted more. Let's say it is close to what I get for my home, but I'm getting something that I'm upgrading to. But all the prices go down, and when I go to sell that home, I'm getting probably $100,000 less than what I paid for it.
Right, and not only that, but you're going to have less in your pocket for a down payment, which means that you pay more of a mortgage. Yeah. And like it just continues to go downhill for the individual and the working class person. Like it's not helpful.
Right.
It may be nice it's not even nice for rich people like at all. Like it's just a coercive system that it's too much influence at the federal level to push to grab more money because of their overspending. Like it continues to go back to spending. Like if you had 6 years to do this, you could have built more houses, created more incentives municipally. Got rid of red tape, but the Liberals love red tape. They just love piling it on. So,
okay. I want to touch on the Bill of Rights, the homeowners' Bill of Rights that they want, the getting rid of blind bidding and.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a big one right now. AREA made that announcement of criminalization of housing or home buyers. That's a big statement because they represent 350,000 realtors. So they're huge, right? So for them to say that, I don't know if you've ever looked into like what the differences between blind and open bidding is, but blind bidding, basically you put an offer and you have no idea how many offers are on the table so far, and you don't know what they are at all. But Australia did this where they got rid of blind bidding and they went to open auction basically. And you don't have time to negotiate, no time to consider. Sometimes you don't even have time to go view the house or go through the house for a second chance or even go and do an inspection. People could be sitting on your front lawn within 2 minutes, putting a bid in, putting another bid in, the third person closes and they sell it for whatever that third person is. Like it's not in the favor of the seller as much, whereas it could be really aggressive for the buyer. Whereas right now you have a transaction like your realtor brings you through the house, they give you advice, they can negotiate and fight on your behalf when it comes to how much they think you get the house for. And you can have time to actually think about it before the offers maybe go on the table, or if say they're taking offers like a week from now, or they take offers whenever. You can put an offer in whenever when that's the case. And if the buyer says, yeah, that's exactly what I want, they'll take it. But it's at your leisure to think and to actually make an educated decision. Whereas if you get rid of blind bidding, it's completely aggressive. And so if you think that's going to slow the housing market down, it's not. It's just going to create even more aggression for people to try to like go to these house auctions basically, and then just put a bunch of bids in and try to outbid the next person like it's Storage Wars or something. Like, it's terrible.
Yeah, it sounds chaotic to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like when
And
I bought,
if you think that's going to drive down the prices, it's just going to be an auctioneer show. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like when we bought our house, that was my first time ever buying a house, and I felt pretty relaxed. It was not a stressful situation to me at all. This sounds stressful, and I know that what's going on right now is stressful. So yeah, do you have anything else that you want to add about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
You're talking, like you mentioned, about how it seems stressful. Like, and I think it comes down to having the right people in your corner. Like, so if you have, like, there's a stat about how only, I believe it's 48% of like millennials, done in a study with Sagen for first-time home buyers, actually went to go get pre-approved before they started looking at houses. And the millennials that looked at houses were like 80 and 90%. Like, they looked at houses. So they have to have like the right people to support them through education. So like a good realtor they can actually trust, and a mortgage representative or someone in the mortgage industry that will actually lead them through what the real budget is and what they can work with.
Yeah.
And to give them a better financial education. And yeah, I think that's where it comes down to, like, just the right kind of people to lay your support into, like, in your community, rather than it being like, could you imagine being a first-time home buyer in your 20s or something, and like just going to an auction for a house and having like maybe like I don't know, like, it's just an example, like a retiree or someone else who's really just going to take it all from, or even someone from Toronto being like, I'll pay cash $1 million, I don't care.
Yeah.
Stuff is crazy, and you're like, you have no chance.
So what you're saying is realtors and mortgage specialists are actually quite useful.
Thanks. Yeah, not to toot my own horn, but yeah, for sure. Like, we have the financial education, but I work with the realtors and the lawyers to help with the client transaction, so that it's not like them all by themselves trying to figure it all out, because like they need someone to say, like, how does this work? How does getting a mortgage work? And like, what do those steps look like? And then getting a realtor to actually give them proper advice when they're looking for a home, and what they could put in for a price negotiation, and conditions and waivers of conditions, and then the lawyer to support the whole deal, like legally. Like, there's going to be this 3-ring circus between us, whereas if you just go in by yourself, you really don't have, like, I don't know, you're at an odds.
Yeah, there's no way we would have wanted to do that on our own when we were buying, for sure. We definitely found use in all of those people helping us out, so it was definitely useful. Now,
you did mention, sorry, about the houses.
Go ahead first, yeah.
Okay, so you did mention about the build, I think it's called build and repair affordable houses or something, that Trudeau wants to do as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so he wants to like build 2.7 billion, or he wants to spend total of $2.7 billion over 4 years of the extra funds for houses. Like, so each party has it. Do we want to wait on that one and then just go through some of the other parties?
Well, my next question was kind of to do with that, actually. I'm wondering, and I know other people are wondering, what do we do then? There's obviously a supply issue. Personally, I have some of my own thoughts, and I'll share them with you if you don't end up touching on them. But again, I don't know anything, so I wouldn't, but if there's a supply issue, and obviously Trudeau wants to throw some money at it, is that the proper thing to be doing, or is there another way of dealing with that supply issue?
At a federal level?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could increase some tax incentives for, say, builders. That's one way you could do it. You could give them a benefit to help build more houses. Like, I know personally of, there's over 300 houses by one organization here in Chatham that are being built. So like, there are incentives, and even at a municipal level, that people are pushed to develop land. Now, when it comes to a federal level, you could do tax credits or benefits, or even maybe give business owners or self-employed people who are contractors in building industry some sort of incentive to help stimulate their business, maybe a short-term loan or a long-term loan for getting supplies and buildings together. Maybe lessening the red tape for permits for municipalities, maybe giving them an incentive if it is through pay. There's a lot of different ways they can do it, but the main thing is just to get houses built if you already have a population of demand. So the plan for Trudeau's housing bill doesn't even cost for the immigration that he wants to introduce at 70% home buyers. So that doesn't help. And even the NDP, they only wanted like 500,000 or 500 million. Was it? Yeah, 500. Yeah, I think it was 500,000, which doesn't. Yeah, New Democratic Party wants to create 500,000 units within 10 years. That's not even going to touch anything. So that's great.
Yeah,
doesn't help you whatsoever.
That math doesn't add up at all. So that was actually one thing that I was thinking. Okay, so if you have all these building companies, right, and that's their bread and butter, they build. So if there were less red tape and tax incentives for these people, these businesses, those businesses are going to thrive because they're working, and then they're going to need to hire more people to do those jobs, right? So there's more jobs and more people working.
Yeah, and then also even giving maybe for developers, so people who own the land who are developing, say farmers who have sold the land to the city or developing that land, but builders are now working it for them.
Yeah.
They could even have some sort of like tax benefit for when they've completed the stages of builds. So like maybe when they develop X amount of parcels, or each stage, they'll have actually mapped out stages for like subdivisions and such, like 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. Like they could actually get a benefit to releasing certain land, because that's one of the biggest things that really stop a lot of these, say, farmers, some farmers and some landowners in at least our local area to sell and develop their land, because the tax implication too, like they don't, if they're making money off of it through generating farmland or even it just paying the tax that's on there, it's better than selling it and having the capital gains and everything on that. So right. It's huge.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So are there any of the policies from the other parties, the Conservatives or NDP, that you can compare and kind of talk about, and like, do they have anything better? Do they have any other better ideas than what the Liberals have come up with?
So honestly, I think the Conservatives did come up with a little bit of a better plan when it came to housing. They wanted to plan to build 1 million homes within the next 3 years. So long as they reduce immigration and they can also get a tackle on some of the fiscal issues and the monetary policies, then they could, that could help a little bit. But how is that going to get done is a different question, right? It's like there's very few parties that have actually like listed the steps, or at least the ways that they're going to make that happen, other than building houses. Like that's all they're saying.
When I hear that as a citizen, just as a plain citizen, I hear, well, we're going to build 1 million houses. What enters my mind is, okay, so you're going to use taxpayers' money to build houses, and how does that help our deficit? How does that help not spend as much money as, we're trying to get this all under control. And again, when we were talking about allowing the builders, the entrepreneurs, these owners of building companies and the workers that go along with it, when we give them incentives to create that supply, then for me, it feels better. It feels like you're allowing people to have an opportunity to be a business owner or an entrepreneur. You're allowing somebody to create a business that's going to have plenty of jobs, plenty of people working for that business, instead of the government putting their hands into the situation and just tossing money at the situation. And who knows, every time the government tries to throw money at a situation, the money doesn't go where it's supposed to go. There's a lot of wastage, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved, and to me, it doesn't sound comforting at all.
Yeah, I agree. And that's like the biggest thing. That's why I mentioned like a tax incentive or something that they would have for the small business owner to keep their business running and also expand their business to like employ more people who then they would technically be able to tax for income, and like that they would all come back in some form, but it would solve part of the issue of housing. Give the incentive back to the Canadians to be capitalists. Like let us run businesses again and let us be free.
I love that.
Yeah. I think that both parties, Liberal and Conservative, wanted to like try to figure out unneeded office space and repairing them into like condos and something. In my mind, that just sounds like it could be okay, but let that be a privatized institution doing something that they're buying like a plot of real estate. Like look at even like Brooksfield Asset Management or something, like who's the owner of so many properties across the world. Let them do something with it instead of getting government hands involved as much. And also that just sounds like a lot of wasted money. And I'm not even going to get into like the S&C level and scale or whatever. It's scandal or anything like that. But like when it comes to repair and Montreal, yeah.
Well, I read an article today. It was basically like use it or lose it I guess, proposal by the Liberal government. If you have a property that's not really being used or they don't think is being used, I don't know, what is it, efficiently, wisely, or whatever their opinion is, they're going to take it and turn it into housing.
So that's the issue with that. Like we see a little bit of it in Toronto, but the biggest problem with this is actually in Vancouver. It's the issue of foreign buyers inside the province. So foreign buyers from China and other countries come to Vancouver to buy and launder. Like it's a very known fact by even some of the basics like economics. Like it's a way of money laundering through our country. And that's a big problem. It needs to stop completely. Like, they're buying empty houses and buying empty buildings. And like it's just a ghost town in Vancouver for people just to throw money outside of our country and launder it through. So that's one of the reasons why they came up with that idea. But that's not the problem. Like, great, it's going to be housed. So now all they have to do is now rent it out and then claim that there's a ton of renovations that need to get done and just keep laundering more money through. Like, that's just going to be another issue. Like, you need to limit foreign buyers, period. And I think both parties said that they're going to stop. Liberals said that they're going to pause or freeze for 2 years foreign buyers. The the Conservatives said that they're going to stop. For how long though, we don't know. But I did actually pull a Stats Canada graph up because they actually have a great Stats Canada has a great website. If you guys ever want to fall asleep to numbers, you can actually look up this graph. But like the number of places that are owned in Ontario. Let me see if I have it. So there's the number of residencies, the number of people who are out of Ontario, out of Canada, who own a property in Ontario specifically. I didn't look at the rest of the country, but just in Ontario alone, there's 187,325 out of Canada people who own properties in Ontario. That was a stat from they only updated this 2019, so 2020 and 2021 is not even on there, and that's from Statistics Canada. And out of that 187,325, only 18,165 of those people or entities own more than 3 properties each. So we don't know about after 3 though. It's 3 or greater. So that means close to 18,000 people from out of Canada own properties, multiple units in Ontario. So that they could own a greater amount of Ontario than even some citizens.
Wow.
Yeah. That's that was kind of a shock to me because I was looking up some stats about the ownership of Ontario because I seen that we are having this housing shortage. So
Yeah, that's yeah, I don't even know what to say about that. Okay. What we'll shift gears a little bit here.
yeah.
What has been one of your best experiences that you've had during the pandemic being a mortgage specialist?
My best experience, I would say, running my business freely at a peak time of housing, and stepping away from some of the restrictions that were placed on like the retail industries. So I can work from home. I have flexibility of being with my family. A lot of companies that are doing this, they're getting away from the typical office space. And I don't have to, like, a lot of my job is remote too, so I don't have to see people, but I do on my own accord usually to like go to the house that they just bought or something like that and bring them a gift and like, congratulate them and stuff, but I don't have to sign paperwork in person. So the best experience I would say is I like the freedom and autonomy of running my business in my day, and focusing on my clients, period, and having the leisure and flexibility of my family.
Okay. What has been one of the worst experiences you've come across in the pandemic?
I think it's just getting to the point of, like, if you're saying pandemic, like, I'm just tired of the constant rhetoric of going back and forth between like a new variant, anti-vax and vax, and like just the whole like argument about it when it's just about limiting and restricting more rights. When it comes down to like what the policymakers are doing, when I look at my local community and I look at the people who own the businesses that I've talked to and I've known for years, and other people in my industry, like we're all very common sense people, even down to like say the florist or the restaurant owner. Like we're all human, and when people start to, I don't know, like when the government starts to put their hands in and make it harder for us to live our day-to-day life, and interact with each other like humans should, that's probably been the hardest thing, like to know what is right and what's wrong, and like to like have just open conversations, without feeling like it's going to come down to a political debate. So
yeah. I apologize to everybody. I have to back up for a second because there was a question I wanted to ask and I forgot to ask it. So yeah, so we were talking a lot about supply and all of that stuff with housing, and we've been talking about home ownership mostly. I want to touch on the rent situation. So, again, feedback I'm getting, I remember when I was renting, whatever, apartments, units, houses, that kind of thing. Man, I have to say, I had it easy. Like rent was not, I worked hard, but rent was not a hard thing for me to come up with. And now people, what are we at now? What, $1,800 a month on average for a rental?
Nuts. It's nuts. Yeah, like it's got to be up there now. I thought it was like 1,600 or 1,500, but yeah, it's probably 1,800. Like even right now, I feel for like a lot of millennials, like even the ones around my age group, that are 1 in 3 millennials have to borrow from a family member or friend or other source to come up with a down payment just to be able to afford a home to buy. And renters alone, like you have to realize that inflation continues to rise, rent continues to rise, the market continues to rise based on demand, so people can get more money based on market value. And the person is stuck working the same job that they may have had, which was okay earnings, but now the business owners are restricted because they can't make as much money because of another red tape issue or restrictions of COVID. Like it just comes down to like people not being able to afford a cost of living, and be able to have some money to put aside for savings to even buy a home.
Right.
Like even like if you look at CMHC statistics, they're, as of 2021 January, CMHC came out with a stat showing, at least they have a chart, you can download it, it's free, it's unclassified, for rental arrears, and it's a list of cities showing all the arrears of rent. And even from the owners of those buildings, in London alone, there's $1.6 million in 2020 of rental arrears.
Oh.
So that's just thinking about not just the renters, but the people who are owning those homes who are now up for like they have to pay the mortgage, they have to go into debt. And there's only so much government like help with that. But like renters alone, they can't even afford. And I don't blame them if they had to go in arrears. Like we had to put your family first. But yeah, it's both it's hard on both sides. The person who owns the property and the people who are renting the property. It just gets worse.
It's a lose-lose situation, isn't it?
Yeah, and it all just comes down to like the economics. Like it's not the fault of the landlord, because they had to they bought the house trying to make some extra money or something like that, and they bought the house for $500,000 and with $100,000 over asking price, and now they have to charge X amount to make it affordable and make it profitable in some way, and the market keeps rising. Like if they look at it from a business point of view, and then the renter just wants somewhere to live so they can afford somewhere to make a living.
And then being stretched that hard, even if they're able to make rent every month, they're not able to put anything away to eventually buy.
Yeah, they can't. They're having a hard time savings. And that comes down to another issue, like we won't even have time to get into, but like financial education for savings. It's not just as simple as people think, like, especially now that the inflation is the way it is, for people to say like, oh, just, like pull your straps up, like your bootstraps up and just start saving and like crunching down. But like you can, if there's a lot of stringencies and a lot of people who have to work or live together in families for long periods of time to be able to afford to buy a house. Yeah. I think it's not to sound like generic, but I think that's why a lot of new to Canadians do end up buying a house within 3 to 4 years, is because a lot of them bring their family. Can you hear me?
Oh, you just cut out there. Can you repeat that again?
Yep. So I think that's why a lot of new to Canadian citizens, they end up coming with their families, so they all work and they all live in one house, and like they would either they're out west or in Toronto or whatever, and they all try to make a living so they can all benefit from it. In Canadian culture, we all tend to like move out when we're young, or we try to get out and go to school or not go to school, or just get out of our parents' house and try to make a living. And it's harder to do that now. The culture and the time is different.
I know I've had people come to me and tell me that they've had to move their entire family in with their parents. So they couldn't afford rent anymore, and they were in a situation where their place got sold and things were changing. They couldn't afford the rent anymore, so they had to leave, and they obviously couldn't afford to buy a house, so they had to move, like husband, wife, and children into their parents' house. Yeah,
it's getting worse. And even for a household income, like we're talking about, like cost of living, to be able to afford and save. If your household isn't making $50,000 to $100,000 a year, you're not even in a bracket to afford a mortgage at this point, unless you have a huge down payment. Like even in our little like municipality here, like you can't afford to buy a house under $50,000 if you're not making $50,000 or more almost. Unless you borrow a huge amount from your family or something, or you save for years and years to try to get up there.
Right, and that's just one individual. That's not like per married couple. A married couple would need both incomes in order, like both very. Yeah, so
if you're married, like if you're together, you guys make $100,000 a year, then you're still doing okay in this area. But it's but to even say it's still crazy.
Yeah, and I think it really depends on your situation too, if you have children or not, and how many children, right? And just depending on their needs as well. And
exactly. They could be more. They might need more assistance or like education or like anything. They could have developmental delays, or The kids are very costly. I know from experience. So.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so that definitely makes it very hard. So again, what do we do? What do we do about the rent situation? Because, I know it's out of control, and I've had people comment to me that there needs to be some kind of, cap or regulation or something like that. And for me, as being I like a fair amount of capitalism. I like people to have the freedom to, run their businesses the way they want to and things like that. And you always hope that the market will take care of itself. However, we've been put into a special circumstance here where this got out of control, and it's now out of our control. So what do we do? Is there room to still turn things around, or do we have to do something more aggressive?
That's a great question, Liz. I think that it comes down to like rebalancing the market by having more supply available for people to start being able to see common, comfortable prices. This may be a really terrible shock for a lot of people, but the housing market for the southwestern Ontario area was always lagging behind the rest of Canada as a growth factor in terms of equity. We were always kind of like almost at that 1%, maybe 3% growth of equity every year. The problem that they're seeing with the rent is because the people who are buying and the investors who are taking advantage of the low prices down here, like I mentioned earlier in our conversation, about 50% of new buyers in this area are from out of town. They're seeing it as really advantageous for them to buy because they're seeing equity growth of 7% over year now. So it's getting really strong for them. But if the market goes the other way, or at least balances where there's more fairness based on demand and supply, that's the economic issue. It's not just about like whether we can limit someone's rights to charge X amount, or if we can, pump more money or give people more credit or tax or whatever. It's not about spending more money. It's about like offering solutions for long term. Because if you just give renters a cap, then what happens when houses continue to rise and nobody's buying and no more investors? You may have a problem. Like you can't try to freeze and stop the housing market. That's not what you should do. And you shouldn't penalize people for trying to sell and or buy. You just need to start fixing the problem of supply and demand and find that equilibrium.
Okay. Okay. I think you've definitely confirmed a lot of thoughts I've had in my head about a lot of this stuff, recently. And yeah, that's very helpful. So, what would you say, how does our current housing crisis compare to the 2008 financial crisis?
Well, our insurers are pretty strong. So like Sagen, Canadian, CGI, and CMHC are the insurers. They are all, I've called them all, like I have direct lines to them, and I call them and I ask them questions all the time. They're all really confident in their portfolios and their lending capability. As far as a housing bubble that you think that's going to happen, like all the economists were blown away that we didn't already have one. Like they all predicted for one in 2020 and 2021. They're like, oh, this is going to be it. This is going to be something. And then a lot of them just didn't see it. But I will say that confidence from an investment side of view, like when I talk about portfolios and investment portfolios, confidence in Canada is waning. And that was I saw that even in 2018 and 2019 when I was in financial advisory. Like a lot of investment portfolios were going towards the American, weighing in the American markets rather than the Canadian, because there was so much unknown. But if you're thinking of a 2008 housing crisis, we're in a little bit more of we're in a worse situation and a better situation, I guess. It's two sides. So the better situation is that we have very strict regulation. which actually I want to mention that going back to the Liberals, they want to start opening up the restrictions that we have placed on, it's a ratio like total debt servicing ratios and other things like that allow us to be able to lend money to certain people. They want to make them more flexible and easier for business for self people, and also just I think it was like first time home buyers and other. There's also new to Canada people. But then we get into that's when we get into an issue of this, like the 2008 crisis, is when we start lending money that people can't afford when the rates go up, because like that's when we have a problem. Our testing rates, the tester's at 5.25 right now. From across the board, most of it is sitting between that 4.79 to 5.25%, which means that we won't give you a mortgage unless you can afford that. Okay. So that means that that doesn't count for a lot of things though. So when we count that debt, that means that we don't count like Amazon subscriptions. We don't count like Netflix in your daily monthly budget. We don't count like any of that stuff. Your car insurance, we don't care about that. We just care that you have a car payment. Like there's a lot of things that still are being taken out of context. So those ratios are there to protect Canadians from overspending in their budget just to get a home. And that's going to put them in a long-term problem. Which is why I was like mentioning how the Liberals want to open those restrictions up and get rid of some of those. And that's when we run into a housing issue, is when we start lending, say, an 18-year-old $1 million for a home because he's got a good factory job. You know what I mean? Like that's not it. If the money isn't there, it's not making financial sense.
Yeah, I can see how that would be really dangerous, because should everything come crashing down around that person and they can't afford it anymore, that can destroy people. You lose everything. You have to claim bankruptcy. It's not a pretty picture. And that can take years and years and years to get over, and some people never recover from that type of devastation.
Yeah. And you mentioned like something that sounds like a lot of job loss too. So the Conservatives did come out with a idea around job loss, but I want to keep in mind that some institutions, like even the one I work with for my mortgages, they provide job loss creditors insurance to protect you from if you can't pay or if you lose your job. I think that the Conservatives want to make it mandatory that you take that job loss insurance, or at least have job loss insurance on your mortgages across the board everywhere, to help mitigate that.
And so how will that add to the cost of buying a home by having?
Yeah, I potentially see that, like, because the money has to come from somewhere. And like what insurance company is going to cover this, and like that's the big. There's other questions that come after that. It's like what's the difference?
That's a big because stuff happens, right? And so that's a big insurance to have. And so how much does that cost? I mean, we're already struggling to buy a home, so how much more does that cost to buy a home if we're making something like that mandatory?
Yeah, and then who's that going to? Like what insurer is that going to? I want to know like where my money's going, and then who's getting paid after that. So yeah. And
then what kind of fine print is there involved in that too?
Yeah, is it underwritten like if I get fired, or do I lose my job, or yeah,
or does it? Yeah, what special circumstances in losing that job? Yeah, I don't know. It's very complicated, but
there's even COVID relief, like part of the job loss insurance right now in a lot of institutions.
Well, I mean, that part, that's I would hope that doesn't last forever, but here we still are.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. It'd be nice, but I guess that there's another variant or something that's coming out. I don't know.
Well, then we still have to keep
there's always
that yeah. So, all right. Well, this has been This has been awesome. Very informative. Is there anything else that you think we haven't hit? I feel like I've hit the things that
No,
I wanted.
I think that there was a lot of good questions that you came up with. And like, I wish I could speak in like really great light towards our municipality, like for long term, especially for younger people. But right now, the biggest demand I think that we need is jobs locally, so that we can supply the earnings to be able to buy the houses at the prices that they're rising in, because the houses locally are not going to go down. And if they do, that's going to be a minor correction. But just due to immigration internally, and at a provincial level and a federal level, I just wish that we would have a little bit more financial knowledge and sense, and some common sense, to give back the power towards the people, to be able to make the free market a free market without adding a bureaucracy and more costs and measures implied.
Okay, so in other words, stop printing so much darn money.
Stop printing, stop giving it away. Like, stop giving it away to other countries, and stop giving it away everywhere. Like, and start allowing the people to keep what they earn, and to allow us to make that free market choice. If I want to go to a local produce shop, or I want to go to Sarah's Market or whatever like that, and I don't want to go to Walmart, I'm like, yeah, you like, don't restrict me.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on. I know for me that this was extremely useful, and I know that people in the community are going to find it very useful as well. And just to get a grasp on what is actually going on and what is actually causing this, I think this was extremely important information for people to know, so that when they're demanding something from their government, they know what to ask for.
Exactly. I appreciate that, the time to be able to speak on the housing issue. There's a lot of gears, like I said, that are going on, but it starts at the top and it works its way down, from a federal level down to the municipal. Like, you have to have cohesion between them, and I hope that if anyone got any information or they had any more questions, like, leave some comments, and hopefully we'll get to those questions. I know for now there's only so much time to put in. So
also, you're obviously very knowledgeable and very helpful. So where can people reach you?
I have a Facebook page. So if you look up Cody McLean, like mortgage specialist, I have a Facebook page. I have an Instagram. People can reach out to me through social media that way. That's fine. All my social media has links to my direct professional pages as well. So if you guys are trying to get a hold of me, it has my contact, and email and everything there.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you again, Cody, for joining us. It's been an awesome interview, and this has been fun and interesting, and it cleared up a lot of questions. So thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so that concludes this episode of talking about the Canadian housing crisis. I hope you got just as much out of it as I did. I found this to be extremely informative and cleared up a lot of things. I want to stress that this now, I hope, gives you some questions to ask your government officials when we're talking about this crisis, and bring it up to them, email them, send messages, whatever it is. But now you know the questions to ask, and you know where all of these issues are coming from. So again, you've watched this episode of the People's Forum. This is a platform where it gives the people an opportunity to talk and to express ideas and have real conversations. So I thank everybody for joining us tonight. And again, my name is Liz Vallee. I am the candidate for the People's Party of Canada for Chatham-Kent-Leamington. This is Liz Vallee, PPC Strong and Free. Have a